This and all talks at the 2019 JavaScript for WordPress Conference are brought to you in part by our sponsors Pantheon, a high-performance hosting platform with agile developer tools. Check them out at pantheon.io.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for the next session of Track 1, the JavaScript track here at the JavaScript for WordPress Conference. And this session, I'm really excited about. I'm curious to know what's going on. We are talking about virtual reality in WordPress with Michael Posso. And I'm so excited for this. Michael, if you could drop your bio in there for us. Michael is joining us here. He is a front-end developer focusing on developing and managing accessible and fast websites for large corporations using WordPress. And he's going to be talking to us today about virtual reality in WordPress. Before I hand off to Michael, yes, thank you. As an early adopter of virtual reality, Michael started coding immersive experiences using A-Frame and Unity. He currently works as a manager of digital development and also organizes a Latino web developer meetup in New York City. Is that Latino Tech?
No, different.
Different. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's more for developers.
Cool. Michael has participated as a speaker in WordCamp New York 2018, Silicon Harlem. He is also a teacher at Creative Center of Technology and Design at FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology, at State University of New York College. We're super excited to have you. Before I hand off to Michael, I just want to remind everybody that we are so grateful to the sponsors of this conference. We have Pantheon, Kinsta, and we have a new framework for WordPress called Frontity that have sponsored this conference and are helping making it possible. Thank you so much. We're all grateful to be here. And without further ado, let me go ahead and switch over to Michael.
Okay, first of all, thank you everybody for participating in this amazing event. Thank you to all the organizers and sponsors. This is my first time actually participating. And very excited. So my talk is divided in three parts. The first part is going to basically give you a general idea of what's happened. A lot of development in the past 6 months, choose explosive developments in a very short amount of time. The second part, we're going to talk about WordPress and how you could start using web VR and virtual reality and augmented reality on your WordPress projects. And the third part is going to be more code focused. We're going to talk about A-Frame and how A-Frame works and how A-Frame can really be the tool that you need to start using virtual reality on your WordPress sites. So I'm going to switch to my Google Slides, and I'm going to begin the presentation. It's a little bit slide heavy. We are going to see some code later in the presentation and some examples as well. The examples are hosted in Glitch. For those of you that are not familiar, Glitch is a really great online development environment. Think like CodePen. But it's really good for A-Frame. It works very, very well with A-Frame. So let me switch my screen to my Google Slides, and we'll get started.
Good with me.
All right. So yeah, my name is Michael Posso. I'm a web developer. Recently, about maybe 2 years ago, I started getting into virtual reality. Especially because I was very interested in using virtual reality for teaching foreign languages. And I started playing with A-Frame back then, and eventually I got my own Oculus Rift, and then I started developing more app-based experiences using Unity. I also work as a development manager, mostly using WordPress. For multilingual sites. The corporation where I work right now is a multinational corporation, so a lot of our sites are deployed in different languages. So that is also a very interesting part of what I do is dealing with all the nuances of different languages when something gets deployed in French and how deploying it in Chinese or simplified Chinese. So that's an aspect of my job that I enjoy a lot. Let's look at the table of contents. We're going to go over some background information since virtual reality is a new subject for a lot of people. I like to always talk about a little bit of the history of virtual reality, what is happening right now, what is the market, how are these headsets right now, how much do they cost? A lot of people still very skeptical about virtual reality, but I think that the market is moving in the right direction. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We also will go over what is considered virtual reality. There's a lot of stuff that we think as virtual reality that is not really a VR. Also, we'll talk about the state of immersive technologies. And when I refer to immersive technologies, is anything from virtual reality to augmented reality to mixed reality. So we'll talk about what the difference is between those. Most importantly, the state of the web VR market, which is why we're here. Web VR, of course, relies on the browser to deploy these experiences to a specific audience. One of the most popular virtual reality experiences is 360 video, and 360 video is widely utilized on the web, so we talk about that as well. Then we're going to move into more of the WordPress realm, and what are some people doing in WordPress, what are some of the companies doing out there with WordPress. Then we talk about a little bit about A-Frame. A-Frame is the framework that I recommend for people to start using if they're interested in web VR. We'll see a little bit of JavaScript, not too much. I know this is the JavaScript track, but we'll look at some JavaScript and how to implement it with A-Frame. And what is next? And I'm also going to give you some resources if you're interested and curious. Some really good resources for you to experiment with. It's important to understand some of the terminology. This is a very simple list of terms. One of the first terms is head-mounted display, so HMDs. And this is basically the devices that you put on your head. So think of an HTC Vive, an Oculus Quest, an Oculus Rift. There is a few out there in the market. This is very different when we deal with web VR, because web VR, you can also experience web VR in the browser. And if you're using a browser, you could either use your laptop, your tablet, your computer, your desktop computer, or also a mobile HMD like the Samsung Gear VR. Also, latency. Latency is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to virtual reality. Latency is basically the delay between your computer and the display. So if latency is a problem, your virtual reality experience is going to suffer, and it might cause even motion sickness on some people. We'll also 3JS, which is what the engine behind A-Frame. 3JS is a library for rendering 3D graphics in the browser, and it relies on a series of different technologies like SVG, WebGL, the JavaScript API. We also talk about degrees of freedom. This is a very important concept to understand, and it's very important in web VR because degrees of freedom in web VR are constrained to 3. So when we talk about 3 degrees of freedom, we're basically saying up, down, left, and right. So it's just literally tracking your head movement. It's not tracking your body movement or your position. So when we're dealing with something like A-Frame or web VR, most likely we're going to deal with 3 degrees of freedom. Even 360 video, we're talking 3 degrees of freedom. Now, 6 degrees of freedom is what you get when you use some of the most advanced HMDs like the Oculus Rift or the recent Oculus Quest, which actually doesn't require a computer, and it has what you call inside-out tracking. So the tracking is being done by actual cameras on the device, while the other headsets like the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive, they're using sensors. So the hardware setup is a little bit more complicated, which also adds to some of the challenges that some people have with VR. Well, when I refer to mobile headsets, I'm referring to something like the Google Daydream or the Samsung Gear VR, or something as simple as Google Cardboard. These are basically frames where you can put in your mobile device and experience virtual reality that way. So you're depending on a mobile device. There's not much technology in the headset itself. All of the brain and power is coming from the mobile device itself. This is very different than the other more advanced HMDs, which actually have a lot of technology on them. They have sensors, they have all kinds of trackers, they're relying on a CPU, they're relying on a video card. And that's the next term. The next term is the high-end HMDs. Those will be things like the Oculus Rift, HTC Vive. And again, let me just make a point here. We're talking about WebVR, which basically is just utilizing a browser. So even in these very expensive, very advanced HMDs, you can still access a browser and you can still experience WebVR. When we talk about resolution, we're all familiar with this idea. Is just basically lines of pixels that are rendered on the screen. Obviously, higher the resolution, the higher the quality of the images, but also that poses a challenge because you want your experience to be fast and to be performant and to be as compatible as it can be. And the last term that we're going to review is the field of view. So when I'm talking about field of view, we're basically what you can see with your two eyes. So a human being can see about 120 degrees. And the different headsets will offer you a different field of view. So this also presents a challenge for your experience because now you have to have that into account. You got to find an average field of view that can be deployed and used by most people as possible. So here's a quote from Parmi Lockley. If you guys are familiar, he launched one of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns ever when he came up with the Oculus. He was able to raise and surpass his goal. And 2-3 years later, if I'm not wrong, his company was acquired by Facebook for the tone of, some people say $2 billion, some other people say $3 billion. So Facebook is really, really invested on VR, as well as other companies out there. But Facebook right now with Oculus is the biggest player when it comes to VR implementation and market dominance, and with their Oculus line of products. So he said that VR is going to be defined by the content that is designed explicitly for virtual reality. And again, this is a very important thing to understand because I don't know if you remember when 3D movies came out, a lot of movies that were shot in 2D were converted to 3D, and it just didn't really, the experience wasn't that good. So the same applies to virtual reality. The experience has to be created for virtual reality from the start for them to be effective. It's all about the storytelling and how you're using virtual reality to enhance that story. One last quote: I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, and I do and I understand. This is what virtual reality allows us to do, to actually do what we're experimenting. So that's why virtual reality has huge potential when it comes to education. And I know a lot of schools here in New York City and all over the world have their own VR labs, and they're seeing really, really good results when it comes to enhancing education with virtual reality. So what is WebVR? WebVR is an open specification that makes it possible to experience VR in your browser. So the key here is the browser. As you know, the browser these days is so ubiquitous that it's almost our operating system. When you think about what you do on your computer on a daily basis, you're doing everything through your browser. We're not really using software that much anymore. Everything that we do is through a web app. So WebVR is based on the JavaScript API for support and detection. So meaning it detects the capacity of your phone, gyroscope, and all those features that your mobile phone has, and also WebGL for rendering and rendering of interactive 3D and 2D objects. So WebGL is what is allowing all this to happen. I'm going to move on to the next slide. What is considered virtual reality? So virtual reality is composed of three things. It has to have an environment. It has to be a computer-generated environment. So it's an artificial environment. The user has to interact with that environment, has to be able to interact with that environment. And the third one, I have a typo there, is immersion. So when we think about immersion, think about the headset. Your senses are being taken over by the entire experience with sound, with visuals, and in some of the more complex experiences, actually with touch, because you have your controllers, and these controllers also have haptic feedback. They vibrate. Some of the most advanced controllers, some of the most advanced experiences have you seen maybe in movies or in different museums. You can have a vest that will generate heat, or that will also vibrate. And this is what we call haptic feedback. So the user is immersed in the world and interacts with it with his physical movements. So at the basic level, we're dealing with 3 degrees of freedom, which is literally just head tracking. 6 degrees of freedom, now we're tracking position. And that's what makes virtual reality possible. That's what makes the interactivity and the immersion possible. So this is a quick review of the type of movements that happen in virtual reality. So, in very simple terms, you can, look up, look down, look left, look right. And more advanced ones are actually tracking your position. So not only your position in a specific room, but your height, what level you're in. So you could actually, go under something by just laying on the floor and seeing a completely different experience from that perspective. And the most complete is the 6 degrees for freedom, where you have all of these different actions that you can perform: surge, heave, sway, roll, pitch, yawn. So again, this is just a review of what's happening, of what makes virtual reality immersive. This is a slide that refers to our field of view. As you can see, the field of view of humans is very different than the field of view of other animals. You can have a field of view you can have a monocular field of view or a binocular field of view. You could also do this with A-frame. You could have an experience where what you're seeing with your left eye is slightly in a different angle than what you're seeing on your right eye, and that's what creates the binocular effect. Or they could both be the same, and in this case, it will be monocular. So you can always make that decision when you design your experience of what you want to go for. And here's a quick review of the type of devices. We have the high-end mounted devices. These are things like the HTC Vive, where there is a device that is connected to a computer. Then we have the high-end mobile headsets. That would be something like the Samsung Gear VR, where you put in your phone, and there's some sensors, and there's some other technologies that enhance the experience. Or something as simple as a Google Cardboard, which is like the name implies, it's just a piece of cardboard where you can put your phone, and it has 2 LEDs. Theater devices are devices that are connected to a computer via cable, via wire. On theater devices, those weren't available up until this year, and these are devices like the Oculus Quest. There are other type of devices like the mixed reality headsets, and those will be things like the Magic Leap or the HoloLens. And then we have augmented reality devices that could be something as simple as your phone or your tablet, where you have a camera and you're able to project artificial objects onto the real world. Here is, as background information, the first virtual reality device was called the Sword of Damocles. It was invented by Ivan Sutherland. It offers stereoscopic images, meaning binocular. And it was just literally a series of wireframes on the screen, appearing on the screen. And it had mechanical head tracking. So if you see in the graphic, there's all kinds of wires connected to the headset. And that's how they were able to track the head movement. That was, almost many years ago. And then the first virtual reality consumer product was the Virtual Boy. I don't know if you guys were around this time, some of our audience, I'm sure that you were. But if you had access to this, you were very lucky, a very, very popular person in your school. I remember the first time that somebody brought this to my school, it was a complete sensation. But it was very basic, and it brought to light one of the biggest challenges of VR, which was motion sickness. People started getting sick from using virtual reality. And eventually it became a commercial failure. It was a product, ahead of its time, and it didn't really have a market for it yet. So moving forward a few decades, this is pretty much what you can acquire right now. We have the Oculus line of products that goes anything from $200 to $400. We have the most enterprise virtual reality headsets, which are the HTC Vives that cost an average of $600. And then Sony with their own device, the PlayStation VR, which costs about $200. There's other manufacturers like Samsung also makes headsets, HP, Lenovo. They all had their own line of virtual reality products, but these are pretty much the most popular ones. And like I said, in the past 6 months, there has been an explosion when it comes to virtual reality. And in big part, the big reason why this finally started getting attention and finally started to become more of a viable idea, more of a viable implementation, a mass implementation of VR is thanks to the Oculus Quest. This is what we call a standalone headset. So no wires, no computer. Everything is in the headset. But it offers 6 degrees of freedom because it's using a technology that's using video cameras to detect where you are in the space. The one below is the HTC Cosmos. I don't think it's available in the US, but I'm sure that it's available in Asia. Same concept. I think it has more cameras. One of the biggest issues with the Oculus Quest is that you can't track the controllers once you lift your hand over your head because there's no cameras in the back. That doesn't happen with the other headsets because the other headsets, there are sensors in the room. And for what is more relevant to this talk is the mobile headsets. So these are the ones that require a mobile phone. The headset itself does add a little bit more to the experience. Some of them have Bluetooth controllers that you can see in the image. And they also have their own platforms. So for Samsung Gear is Oculus, is an actual app that you have to install on your phone, and you can download apps through that platform. So that's how you experience the web VR. There are ways that you can actually experience web VR by just opening up your browser, but those are more for like the Google Cardboards type of headsets. And the average price is about $100. Anything between 60, you can get one in Amazon for 60, 70 bucks. Yeah, I hope I'm not going too fast. And lastly, the mixed reality headsets. As you can see, Microsoft was a pioneer in this area. About 2 years ago, they launched the HoloLens, and now it's up to version 2, which was launched a few months ago. And also Magic Leap, which is a very interesting company. Definitely a lot of money behind this technology. But still, these headsets, we're talking about a price average of $4,000. Even though these are not virtual reality headsets, you could still access the internet and use a browser. Magic Leap announced in the last developer conference that they are launching MagicScript, which is a way for developers to code WebVR mixed reality experiences for the Magic Leap. So the interest is there. All of these companies, all of these manufacturers know that a big part of the virtual reality world is going to be on the web. And again, because we're talking about browsers, this is basically the list of browsers that you can use to experience WebVR. Some of these experiences can be used on your laptop or your desktop. Some of the other experiences, you actually need the headset because it needs the feedback from the headset itself in order to work well. So Chrome has good support for WebGL. Samsung Internet, this is a browser that works on Android. It works very well with A-Frame. The other three are actually have to work with the headset itself. So you need to use it through the headsets, which is Oculus Browser, Super Medium, which we're going to talk a little bit more about Super Medium later, and Firefox Reality. So a big player in the WebVR world right now is Mozilla Foundation, and the WebVR team has a lot of credit for what is happening with WebVR. So let's get to WordPress now. So what's happening with WordPress and virtual reality? So WordPress.com started supporting 360 video and 360 photos for a while now. You could literally just launch your browser on your headset and open up the virtual reality view and experience and immerse yourself in a 360 video or a 360 photo. VR content has to be VR 360 content has to be processed. It is done with a series of cameras. There are different technologies. We're going to go over that in a bit. But this is basically the easiest way for you to start using immersive content on your site. So we'll go over some user cases and some fields that are using 360 video and 360 photo very well. Just Google Maps uses 360 photos. And you could embed a 360 map in your WordPress site very easily with the help of some few plugins out there. YouTube, Vimeo, all of these video platforms support 360 video. Facebook supports 360 video. And there is a lot of plugins out there. Some of them are actually using Gutenberg and using blocks to embed 360 video. So this will be the easiest, more reliable way for you to start using immersive content on your websites. So some user cases for 360 video could be travel agencies, real estate, when you could offer 360 tours of the house that you're trying to sell, that you're trying to rent. Travel agencies, I know hotels now do this. It's very common now to go to a hotel website and actually see a 360 view of the room or the lobby or the rooftop. So these are things that are becoming more the norm rather than the exception. Also, I used to work at a company that did a lot of websites for high-end medical practices. And one of the things that we did was to offer 360 photography of their premises, of their medical practice. So dentist office, plastic surgery, physical therapy, all of that. And maps, you could use 360 maps, 360 views of specific points in a map on your website. There's a lot of plugins for that. Interior design and architecture. Imagine if you were an interior designer and you're working on a virtual environment and you want to give your client a preview of what you're working on, well, you could do that with WebVR as well. And you could have a WordPress site that would allow your client to log in and see that type of progress as you're working on it. When it comes to 360 video, there's no standard, there's no special format. We're dealing with an MP4 file. But what is happening with the video is becoming spherical. So there is metadata that is injected in the video by the software and the terminology is Stitch, the software that puts all this video together. That's referred as a stitch. And what you're literally just doing is creating a spherical view of all that footage. For 360 video, we're dealing with 3 degrees of freedom, where basically you're in the center. You're in the center of the video, and you can look around what is happening. So these are some of the cameras that you could get. You know, the simplest one, more consumer based, are the Samsung cameras. There are a few brands out there that cost anything between $70 to $200. Now we're dealing with more professional ones. These are brand products. John had their own brand of 360 cameras, and then some of the more custom-made rigs. This is what you would call a rig, which I literally choose a custom setup of cameras, of digital cameras that are shooting video at the same time and being powered by a custom hardware setup. Those are more advanced. That's something that, for example, people at Vice Network will use, people in the New York Times will use. They will use a more custom setup like that. So if you're interested in shooting the 360 video for your WordPress site, I'll recommend you to look into the Samsung products, or there's also another brand, the Ricoh. Ricoh has a really good camera, and the cost is about $100. So what else can we do with virtual reality in WordPress? So now we're moving into actual virtual reality when you're deploying a artificial environment through the browser. Think about image galleries. Think about, for example, if you have a photography studio and you want an innovative, creative way of presenting your work, rather than just having the classic gallery of pictures, you could actually create a virtual room where your work is being displayed on different walls, and you could walk through this room by seeing your art. You could turn an entire website into a virtual reality experience. This becomes a little challenging, especially when you're dealing with text, because virtual reality is not a good medium for heavy reading. So you have to be very careful there. Interior design, product design. Imagine that you're selling some sort of a custom type of furniture, and you want your clients to be able to visualize how this piece of furniture is going to look like in the living room. So they can send you a picture, a 360 picture of their living room, and you could, with virtual reality, place this chair on that environment and give them a preview. Interior design, architecture, there's a lot of applications. Civil engineering, education, safety training is a big one too. When you're dealing with companies that have to comply with a lot of safety standards, it's very time consuming and expensive to keep their employees trained in this different safety regulations. So with virtual reality, you bring the cost down. It's just be easier for your employees to access that training, and all of that could be used through some sort of content management system like WordPress. So really quick, let's look at some Web VR examples. This is a very simple in-browser 360 virtual tour. This is using something called locomotion. Is another term that's very familiar in WordPress, and is the action of you moving through different areas of your virtual environment. And there's a lot of techniques that you can use to do that. This, for example, is using a technique where you just click on that spot and then you transport it to a different view of the virtual environment. This example right here is a more classic 360 presentation where you're clicking on an image and deploying a 360 video. So when you're doing this through your desktop or your laptop, where your medium is the mouse. So that's how you control the 360 environment. If you were to use this on a headset, now there's no mouse. Maybe you could use something like gaze interaction, and we're going to cover that in a bit. But you could select things with a cursor on the screen, but there's no mouse. If you have controllers, then you have the controllers. But this is a more classical presentation of a 360 photo, 360 video, or 360 environments. Now, this is a little bit different because now we're dealing with, not really dealing with virtual reality, but we're dealing with 3D scans. So Matterport is a company that offers solutions for real estate and architecture. And they have a proprietary product, which is this camera that actually scans your environment and it creates 3D objects. You can deploy that into an artificial environment. And they also have a WordPress plugin that they use for that. So it's a little bit different than 360 video, but a similar concept. Let me check how we're doing on time. Okay. And finally, now since I know the title of the presentation is Virtual Reality for WordPress, but we're also talking about the overall immersive technologies. And one of the most commercially viable technologies, immersive technologies, augmented reality. And it became very popular with Pokemon Go. That's when people started to understand what augmented reality is. So unlike virtual reality, where you are deploying or immersing yourself into a virtual environment, augmented reality is the opposite. Now you are taking artificial elements and putting them in a real environment. And you're doing this through a screen, and it needs some sort of visual input. So some visual device, a camera, or some sort of headset like the HoloLens or the Magic Leap. So this is a popular application where you could literally just visualize how a product will look like on your living room, on your kitchen counter. There's two ways of doing this. You could either do it through the browser, and that's very possible these days, or you could actually prompt the user to download an app. When the app is downloaded, then you access the phone or the tablet camera through the app, not through the browser. One of the companies that are making a lot of really cool stuff with augmented reality is called 8th Wall. And they are using a little bit more advanced technology, but it's still very web-based. And these technologies, what they do is they place an artificial object in the room, but having into account what is happening in the room. So more or less, they can build an image of that room, walls, floor, to place that object there. The other way of doing augmented reality is with an actual marker. So there's got to be something that is going to be utilized as an anchor for your object. That's what your object is always going to be. And of course, education. Imagine if you had a website where you have lessons, some sort of lessons, and then you could enhance those lessons with some sort of immersive technology, whether it's virtual reality or augmented reality. So imagine that you're in a school and you're teaching about democracy and how democracy was invented. And then you can enhance that lesson by deploying a very quick 360 video or a very quick virtual environment where kids actually see democracy in action in ancient Greece, for example. Really, really exciting developments when it comes to education and immersive technologies. So let's get to A-Frame. So now you guys know the huge potential of virtual reality that is finally getting the market traction that we didn't have maybe 2-3 years ago with these new headsets. We know that all the browser makers are on board. We know that Chrome, Firefox, Safari has always been a problem, but we know that people could use immersive technologies very easy, either with their phones or with very cheap headsets, and those that can afford it with more advanced headsets. So we're getting there. There's a lot of skepticism when it comes to virtual reality and mass market adoption, but I'm a believer, and I feel that we're getting there. So one of the biggest players when it comes to web VR is A-Frame. So A-Frame is a subset of HTML that uses a JavaScript API and 3JS to render interactive, composable 3D objects. A-Frame was created by a team of developers at Mozilla, It's an open source framework, and it has become a very popular web VR framework. When it comes to WordPress, the easiest way to use A-Frame will be to deploy 360 video and photos in the browser. Again, it's just HTML and JavaScript. And now we know with the recent developments with Gutenberg and React, it'll be just very simple to implement that into any type of plugin and be able to use the WordPress API to feed content into those experiences. So I'm going to show you a really quick example of A-Frame. If you know HTML, this looks very familiar. This should look very familiar to you. A-Frame is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the background for us. So what we're seeing here is a very basic HTML document where we're calling in the A-Frame script, which is going to make it possible to work. Then we have a body tag, but inside the body tag, we have a scene. And all of our A-Frame objects and entities and sounds and videos are going to live inside that scene. So that scene is my container. Inside, we have all different components, entities. We have a box, we have a sphere, we have a cylinder. We're passing some attributes, position, rotation, color, height, width, radius. And there's other components that we're going to see in a bit. And that's all A-Frame is. That's what A-Frame looks like. Now, of course, there's JavaScript that we're going to look at in a few minutes. And that just is in the document like any other JavaScript, or it could be saved as a separate document like you would do with any website. So let's go and let me show you a very simple A-Frame scene in Glitch. Glitch is that development environment that I talked about in the beginning. And I'm going to switch my, let's see, since I'm already presented on this tab, I might as well just go here. Okay, so that's Glitch loading. You basically have an editor. You have some options to see your code, to see your assets, and that's basically it. So if I click on show, it's going to go into full screen mode. And that is a very basic A-Frame scene. So as you can see in this case, because I'm using the browser on a tablet, the way that I control this scene is with my mouse. If I were using a headset, then it will be my head movement that will be controlling this scene. But that's what A-Frame is. As you can see, there's an option here to go full screen for devices. And sometimes, that is what is going to do for us. Now going back to our presentation, let's go over this, some of the other A-Frame, the things that we can do with A-Frame. So you start getting familiar with the basic building blocks of A-Frame. So we have our A-Frame scene, we have our assets, we have our primitives, which are our box, or cube, or video. We have our entities, which are a little bit more of the JavaScript. And because we're dealing with HTML, we could just use the DOM API to also control some of these entities.
Are Snapchat filters considered AR?
I would say, yeah. I would say that they are considered AR because they are projecting an artificial object and they're detecting your facial features to place them on that on an environment.
And we have a question from Giovanni. Giovanni wants to know, what are the best education VR websites right now, for example, to learn programming? So
the best resource that I can recommend is the A-Frame website. They do have a walkthrough, and they also have days of A-Frame where the community is literally just sharing and uploading experiences on a daily basis. There's also a bunch of A-frame meetups all over the country. The one here in New York is very active, and we're going to have a meetup in a couple of weeks. So yeah, check Meetup. Definitely A-frame, the A-frame website, and like everything, when you're learning programming, it's about just trying it out, figuring out why it doesn't work, reading a bunch of documentation, and rinse and repeat.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Michael, and thank you so much to the attendees for joining us, as well as thank you to the sponsors for making this conference possible.